Is that the Tom Cruise coconut cake?
How did you know that?
It's a famous cake. Every Christmas he sends one to his entire contact list. I've read about it for years. Kirsten Dunst said it was one of the best cakes she's ever had, and she was a Marie Antoinette. Wow. Yup. Yup. That is f***ing good.
Hey, what's up guys? Welcome back to Binging with Babish, where this week we're taking a look at the Tom Cruise coconut cake from Hacks, famously from Doan's Bakery in LA, which as you can see I've special ordered to try for myself. Only thing missing was the gift label I requested from THOMCRUZE. Anyway, as you can see, it's a pretty good looking cake, but is it worth all the hype, not to mention the $130 it costs to have it shipped? And the answer is, yeah, it's a pretty damn good cake. It's moist, fluffy, sweet, and distinctly cocoa nutty. So now can we make one ourselves? First up, we're going to need a bundt cake pan, a non-stick one into which we're going to deposit even more non-stick spray. Then for the cake batter, we're starting with 2 sticks or 225 grams of room temperature unsalted butter, which we're going to beat on high speed for about 1 minute to further soften and prevent lump formation. Then we're adding 400 grams or 2 cups of granulated sugar and beating on medium-high speed for 3 to 4 minutes until light and fluffy. Scrape down the sides of the bowl, and then we're adding 4 room temperature eggs, one at a time, beating each for about 30 seconds and scraping down the sides of the bowl between each egg. We want everything to be room temperature because we're about to add some melted and cooled white chocolate, 115 grams worth. Scrape down the sides of the bowl once more, and then we're beating in 160 grams or 3/4 of a cup of unsweetened coconut milk, 100 grams or about 1/3 of a cup of sour cream, and 1 teaspoon of coconut extract, once again all room temperature. Then in a separate bowl, we're combining 360 grams or 3 cups of all-purpose flour, 1 teaspoon baking powder, 1/2 teaspoon baking soda, and 1 teaspoon of kosher salt. Whisk to combine, add to the bowl, and mix gently until no dry patches remain. Fold together a couple times by hand just to make sure, and then evenly distribute throughout the bundt cake pan. Go ahead and jostle it about, tap it a few times just to get the top nice and flat, and then it's headed into a preheated 325-degree Fahrenheit oven for 55 to 65 minutes, or until the edges of the cake begin to pull away from the sides of the pan. While that cools, it's time for frosting. Into the bowl of a stand mixer goes 1 8-ounce block of cream cheese, a 6-ounce hunk of butter, 1 tablespoon vanilla extract, and a pinch of kosher salt, which, just like everything else, should be room temperature. Beat for about 3 to 4 minutes or until light and fluffy, and then we're sifting anywhere from 16 to 20 ounces of powdered sugar. Go ahead and start with 16 and then adjust from there for thickness and sweetness. Make sure you start on a low speed so that there are no dust ups. Beat for about 1 minute until creamy and frosting like. Once the cake is completely cooled, we're optionally turning it out onto a cake board. This can make it easier to transport and clean up after decorating, and place it on a cake turntable for frosting. And if like me, you're terrible at decorating cakes, fear not. You pretty much just need the frosting to be applied evenly, because the frosting is little more than glue for the star of the show. Sweetened shredded coconut, sprinkled on top and sort of thrown on the sides. If there's a better way to get coconut onto the sides of a cake, I'm all ears. Continue until generously and evenly coated. Press lightly to ensure adhesion, clean up, and serve. Now, about the only difference I can spy is that our cake looks a little yellowier. I'm going to chalk that up to our extremely orange eggs, but in terms of taste, it's not a dead ringer for Doan's, but for an easy cake, it's really close and it's really, really good. But if we go full cocoa nutty on this cake, can it be improved upon? First up, a welcome addition to most baked goods, brown butter, which during the browning process loses water content, which can affect baking. So both to add water and cool it down, we're going to weigh it and add enough ice to bring it back up to 225 grams. Then we got to put this guy in the fridge until he's cooled off, but then bring him back to room temperature, at which point it should be back to a nice soft butter consistency. I'm also going to add about 50 grams of the thick stuff on the top of a can of cream of coconut, which is pretty much pure coconut cream. From here on out, the procedure and amounts are about the same, except for a few key distinctions. We're still adding all 4 room temperature eggs one at a time, scraping down the bowl between each. But for the white chocolate, we're going to make caramelized white chocolate, spreading out a bunch of chips on a baking sheet and placing in a 250-degree Fahrenheit oven for anywhere from 45 minutes to an hour and a half, taking it out to mix it up every 15 minutes. Now, in the middle of this painstaking process, it's going to get all lumpy and clumpy, and you're going to think I ruined it and I'm a bad person. But just stay the course, it'll smooth back out and turn a beautiful shade of beige. Delicious beige. And that's coming from a lifelong white chocolate disliker. Allow to cool to room temperature before starting your batter, remelt if necessary, and add 125 grams. Same deal with the flour, salt, baking powder, and baking soda, as well as the 160 grams of coconut milk and 100 grams of sour cream, or in this case, creme fraiche, just to be a fancy little fancy pants. But this time we're adding them in stages. First adding 1/3 of the dries, mixing and scraping, then adding 1/2 of the wets, mixing and scraping, another 1/3 of the dries, mix and scrape, rest of the wets, mix and scrape, and the rest of the dries, mix and and scrape. Then over to the cake pan, we're going to use butter instead of nonstick spray, painstakingly rubbing it into every crevice in this very crevicey pan. Then you could dust this with sugar, but I figure why not coconut sugar, even just to be thematically appropriate. Make sure the pan is evenly and thoroughly coated, tap out any excess, and patch up any dry spots. And with that, we're ready to cake, but I'm only going to add about half the cake batter because I have a dastardly idea. Using a spoon, I'm going to carve a sort of channel into the center of the batter, into which I'm going to pour a river of dulce de leche, which should hopefully turn into a caramel swirl running through the center of our cake. Once the moat has been dug, it's time to very, very gently cover it up with the second half of the cake batter, taking care not to squish it out the sides. Now it's headed into the same 325° Fahrenheit oven for 60 to 70 minutes, during which time I'm going to try something different with the frosting, a twist on the so-called Russian buttercream, wherein you beat your butter until light and fluffy, but in place of sweetened condensed milk, I have sweetened condensed coconut milk, 14 ounces of which I'm going to slowly add to the butter while the machine runs. Then for a delicious splash of flavor, I'm adding a little bit of homemade spiced rum. As you can see, Kendall made this with warming spices and fresh ginger, but you can definitely use the store-bought stuff. This is just to bring a little hint of flavor, about 1 tablespoon's worth. Then we're going to let that beat for about 5 minutes until super light and fluffy. But when I tasted this stuff, it was delicious, but something was off. It definitely wasn't sweet enough, hence my adding about 4 ounces of sifted powdered sugar, and the texture was strange, but the flavor was unbelievable, so I soldiered on. Meanwhile, the cake's finally emerging from the oven. We gotta let it cool completely, close the door, but keep that oven on because it's time for the final touch. My favorite flavor of seltzer is toasted coconut, so that's exactly what I'm gonna do. Spread out your sweetened shredded coconut and toast for about 10 minutes or until brown, but make sure you give it a stir, otherwise this is gonna happen. Luckily, the dark stuff didn't taste burned, so I just tossed it together, and with that, we're ready to decorate. Just after a little refreshment. Polar, you know where to find me. Now it's time to turn out our fully cooled cake onto a cake board. Little smear of frosting on there to prevent things from slipping. I'm gonna give this guy a few hearty slaps to loosen things up, but the cake ended up being pretty thoroughly stuck, even after running an offset spatula around the outside and giving it a few of my most spirited whacks. It didn't actually come out until I let it sit for 2 hours upside down, allowing gravity to do what I could not. Some pretty wild color variations going on here, but let's soldier forward and decorate. First up, an even generous layer of our coconut Russian buttercream, followed by a generous sprinkle of our toasted coconut. And I gotta say, I really like the way that looks on the cake. It's like coconut cake with an exclamation point at the end. So let's slice it up and see that river of dulce de leche. Oh, it kind of disappeared there. In fact, it soaked through all the way to the bottom/top of the cake, where it formed a crunchy, chewy layer that was probably making it stick to the pan. On top of that, having the buttercream on the cake made me realize that it was greasy. That being said, the flavor and texture of the cake were fantastic, so I think we can make a sort of happy hybrid of the two. Starting with the same brown butter and coconut cream sugar mixture, adding the same 4 eggs one at a time, scraping down between each addition, the same toasted white chocolate, a little more toasted this time, and the same staged addition of dry, wet, dry, wet, dry. This ensures absolute absorption of all the liquids into the flour, yielding a fluffier, tenderer, more consistent cake. I'm going to do the butter and coconut sugar again just because I think it's charming, and obviously this time we're omitting the dulce de leche. So that's our hopefully revised cake. Now what about the frosting? I don't think it's possible to beat cream cheese frosting, so using the original recipe, I'm swapping half the butter for coconut cream, adding 1 teaspoon of coconut extract, and of course 1 to 2 tablespoons of that awesome spiced rum, yielding one unbelievably delicious frosting. So now, moment of truth, will our cake come out? It does. And as one final flavorful f*** you, before frosting, I'm going to drizzle the cake with more caramelized white chocolate. Allow to cool completely, clean up the dribbles, frost generously and evenly, and coat with toasted coconut. And there you have it, my ultimate caramelized white chocolate toasted coconut cake, which came out really, really awesome. The brown butter brings depth and complexity, the coconut cream and extracts bring an extra hit of coconut flavor, and the spiced rum brings an added dimension. Not unlike Deborah Vance herself, it's a rich, timeless American icon.